Well, good morning or good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Chad Griffiths. I'm an industrial real estate broker in Western Canada, and I made a video a week or two ago about tips that I'd recommend for new agents getting into the business. And I had a lot of questions that came in off that, so I figured it might be great to jump in and do a live stream. I've got a few stories I want to tell about the industry, and then I'm also going to give some tips on what I would do for the first 3 months in the business. And I'd love to have this be interactive. I don't know if there's one person watching this or just my wife or perhaps, there's more people watching this. But if you have any questions, and you wanna ask as we go through here, feel free to just, enter into the chat function at any point. My producer on this, Wyatt, will put them in front of me, and I'll just try to answer them in real time. So if you do have any questions about the industry, I'm in industrial real estate, but I'm a partner at a brokerage where I've been at for 16 years, and I've seen a lot of agents, not just at my own office, but other offices in all different types of asset classes. So whether you're considering office, retail, industrial, land, multifamily, if you have any questions about the business side of that on being a broker in one of those asset classes, please feel free just to enter a question in the chat box. And again, I'd be happy to answer those as we go through there. So the first thing that I thought I'd share with you are just a couple of stories. And in that last video that I did, I emphasized the importance and the value of finding the right brokerage for you, making sure that it's actually a good fit, so that you have a career as opposed to a job. And I think that these two stories will help sink in the importance of that. So I started in this industry in 2005, and there is a guy that I know that started at another brokerage, roughly about the same time, and we had completely different trajectories in our career. Mine, I was more allowed to go out and try and source deals on my own right away. I was allowed to tour properties and start building relationships, whereas he was working on a team where the expectations were that he was essentially an administrative assistant. Even though he was licensed, even though he wanted to be a broker down the road, they had him doing a lot of menial tasks. So he would literally be getting people coffee. He'd be constantly getting photocopies. He'd be doing paperwork, doing stuff on the computer. His job was essentially just to be an assistant. And they didn't let him talk to any clients. They didn't let him tour any properties. He was never on the phone. He was just doing administration work. And the main guy that was his senior broker, that was the one delegating him all these tasks, not only did they have him doing all these menial things, and this guy had a business degree, very smart guy, didn't get into the business thinking that he'd be getting photocopies for people. But on top of doing all this work, which he was prepared to do, his boss was an old school guy who kept inferring to him that he was as low as dirt. And I remember the one story he told me after this, and this is how bad it was for him, is that his boss came and his, let's just call this guy, let's call this guy Don. So Don was working on some task, and his boss came in and put a colored picture of a monkey on his desk and said, "Hey, I just want to remind you that you're a monkey and you are doing monkey work for me until I tell you otherwise." And then he walked away. And this guy Don was looking at this picture of a monkey, and all he was thinking is, not only did this guy have to come and put this on my desk, he actually printed it in color, which is pretty remarkable because most of the stuff gets printed in black and white. And this guy actually went and found a colored picture of a monkey and put it onto a piece of paper and printed it off, and then went and put it on his desk. Well, needless to say, that guy didn't last long in the business, and he's actually now in residential real estate, and he's a fantastic agent. He's a really smart guy. He's very personable. He works really hard. If he was at a different brokerage, I think he would have had a much better chance of success than the deck of cards that he was dealt at that particular brokerage. And I would almost be certain that in a different context, his career trajectory would have been much different than it is today. But that's one example of how especially the older school guys, I'm not finding it with the next generation, the people in their call it mid 30s to late 40s. I'm not finding it as much with that generation, but some of those brokers, older ones anyways, tended to have the expectation that you were doing whatever they told you to do and you should just be lucky to be there. So that's why I stress the importance of making sure that you know who you're meeting with and who's going to be your senior broker if you're joining a brokerage, and get some testimonials from people that have worked under that person to get their experience of it, as opposed to just going in blind and finding out 3 months into your job that your boss thinks that lowly of you. And the second story that I could share is another brokerage in my market, and it was a friend of mine who joined this brokerage, and for the first, I thought it was probably 4 or 5 months, that he was there, all that they had him doing 8 to 9 hours a day was cold calling. They would give him a list every single morning, and his job was to go through and call a few hundred businesses, knowing that you're not gonna get a hold of everybody, and even the ones that you do get a hold of, not all of them are gonna be eager to talk to you. But he'd be calling a couple hundred businesses every single day, and he did that for 4 or 5 months. And he didn't get to work on any of these deals. If he got a lead, if he got a hold of somebody and they said that they were interested in leasing or selling or buying, then his job was to pass that lead on to a more senior agent in his office. And if something got closed, he'd get a very small commission on it. And the brokerage didn't give him any timeline on how long this platform or system would last, just that he was lucky to have a job where he could come into and make these calls that were provided to him. They actually made that seem like he was lucky to be a telemarketer for 4 months. So I think those two stories probably serve more as like a horror story on what can go wrong, and those are exceptions. I've actually seen a lot more brokers succeed and do well than the ones that absolutely hated their experience like that, because this is a great industry. If you find a brokerage that will endorse you and support you and get behind you and develop you and provide you the resources you need to succeed, this can be a very wonderful business. But you also do run the risk, if you join the wrong one, then you won't stay in it very long. And the friend of mine that did that for 4 or 5 months, no surprise, he left the business and now he works on the landlord side. So there's probably nobody that I can think of that would make cold calling for 8 hours a day and think that they enjoy doing that and make a long-term career out of it. So that, again, those are just kind of two stories to reinforce my belief that you need to find a brokerage that's a fit for you, where you can see some long-term success on having a career, as opposed to just going in day to day and doing everything that you hate doing anyways. So be very prudent when you're going through the motions of trying to find a brokerage. Uh, so those stories are the way. My main intent with this video was to share with you what I would recommend you do if you've already joined a brokerage. And the first thing that I'd say as a caveat is you might not have the ability to do this, depending on the structure of how you've been hired and what the expectations, not just from the brokerage, but from your senior bosses might be. You might not have the luxury of going to do all of this stuff. You might be doing just administration work for a year or 2 years. That might be something that was established up front, and you might not have the ability to do this stuff. But even with that in mind, I think that there's still things that you could do outside of your day-to-day tasks that will help set you up for long-term career success. And I know that sounds redundant on how many times I've said that, but I really do believe if you're getting into this industry, you want to make a career out of it, not just have a job that you go to. And to have a career, there's things that you need to do on day one, whether you have a rigorous schedule in front of you already that you can't deviate much from, or whether you do have more flexibility and you can start taking advantage of doing more of these things. I believe that if you start doing these things right away, you'll have that much better chance of a long-term career and that much better of a chance of a successful career. So, if that's all sounds good with you, again, feel free to jump in if you do have any questions on this. But I'll look at this from my perspective on what I would be recommending to new agents. Day one, you got business cards, you might have a desk or you might have a virtual office right now. But day one, the first thing I would do is make a conscious decision that there's two things in this business that you just need to do. And you're going to need to do this day one all the way through until the last day of your career. And the first, and I believe that this is the foundation for brokers, is that you need to commit to being an expert in the market. And that sounds probably pretty obvious, but I think unpacking that will we could drill down on this a little bit more to make it more clear. I think you need to be the foremost expert in your market in terms of what deals are happening, what spaces are coming available, what properties just sold, what properties are coming available for lease. Really, really just make an internal commitment that it is not just something that you can achieve right away. It's not just something that will happen. It's a long-term commitment where every single day you need to be getting a little bit better. And this and this industry is very fluid. There's always going to be transactions happening. There's always going to be trends. The economy is going to play an impact on it. Even if you were to learn certain things right now, you need to keep on top of it. It's a never-ending journey to be an expert in this market. And I think that there's overlap with also being an investor in this industry. Whether you're an investor or a broker, that is the foundation. If you don't have that foundation of committing to learn everything you possibly can to know more than anybody else, you'll struggle to separate yourself from the competition. So what I would do right off the bat is you need to learn the asset class that you're working in intimately. So I'm in industrial, so I'll talk more about it from that perspective, but it applies to office, retail, multifamily, land, investment properties, whatever you're doing, you need to be an absolute expert in that. So for industrial, and a few people that I've talked to in the last couple of weeks that have asked questions, you might remember me saying this early on, is that the first thing that I would do is start driving the industrial areas in your city. So most cities will segregate their industrial parks into a couple areas, and that's by design. That's just urban planning. Where they'll want to have industrial areas segregated from residential areas. So for good reason, just the optics of it and any smells or noises that come from it. They're typically going to want to have the industrial areas in a few different parts of the city. So map that out on your city. I can guarantee they're clustered in a couple of areas, and spend a Saturday or a Sunday every single week, 2 hours or so, just driving up and down every single road. And there's a couple benefits of doing this. The first is that it will open up your mind on just how big the industrial real estate market is. You'll start seeing companies that you never knew existed. You'll start seeing tons of industrial product that you would have had no idea what were in these industrial parks unless you had a reason to drive through them in the first place. And you'll start really getting a sense of how big the market is. And just for some context, I'm in a city that has about 1 million people, and our industrial market is 150 million square feet worth of industrial space. So there's so much of this space available that people just aren't familiar with unless they had a reason to do it. So your reason to do it is that you want to become an expert in this. So commit every week, spend an hour or two on a Saturday or Sunday where it's slow in these industrial parks, not a lot of traffic, and drive up and down all those roads and start noticing things. Start noticing if there's a for sale sign. Perhaps there's a company that you'd never heard of that's the brokerage for it, or perhaps it's a large landlord that's leasing it or selling it on their own. Start taking note of all these things. Start seeing if there's a property that's listed for sale or for lease by owner. Start jotting down their name and their phone number, and you'll start developing a list pretty quickly of all the properties that are available in there. But you'll also start getting an idea of activity that's happening in the market. Is there a tenant that just moved in? Is there a property that's abandoned? Is there opportunity that you wouldn't see just being behind a computer screen? And I can assure you, if you commit to doing this, I still do it probably once a month myself right now, not as often as I did when I first started, but I still do this regularly. And I can assure you that if you commit to just physically driving these parks, and it's an arduous task, it's you're driving in a car. Wyatt and I were talking earlier that self-driving cars might be a thing soon. That'd make it a lot easier if we could have some self-driving cars driving us around on this. But in the meantime, you just got to get out there and go through theirs. And I think that that really is the foundation that you should be establishing to make yourself an expert in this market. And you can do that regardless of whether you've got tasks that you need to do from 8 to 5, or you could do this if you are just going out on your own right now. Spend that Saturday and the Sunday, and you will learn things about this market very quickly. To piggyback on that, I would add that you need to start reading as much as you can. So figure out again in industrials, which is what I'm going to talk about, but it's applicable with other asset classes, is just start learning everything you can about those asset classes. So in an industrial, figure out the difference between a warehouse and a manufacturing property. What do tenants or buyers desire in those properties? Is it clear ceiling height? Is it the amount of power? Is it the loading doors? Is it the amount of land? Is it proximity to suppliers or customers? How important are the ceiling heights or the type of construction, whether it's tilt up or precast or a metal building? What are all the differences between these? And ultimately, what do tenants and buyers look for when they're doing this? You need to get a really thorough understanding of what your asset class is, so you can talk confidently about it. And then I would also couple that with just reading everything that you can. So in every major city, there'll be a number of brokerages that produce quarterly reports. And there's probably even appraisal firms or accounting firms or banks that also produce supplementary information. Start reading all of those on a regular basis so you can start getting an understanding of what deals are getting done, what vacancy rates are, what absorption is, what new projects are coming on in terms of development, and really just become a student of the industry. You might have went to school and had a 4-year degree and thought that you're done learning. Well, it just starts now because you need to start studying all of this stuff on a regular basis. And that will start your foundation for the first 3 months of your career. That will give you a really solid base to grow on. And you could see this if you were to spend, call it, 12 times driving these industrial parks over the first 3 months, and you started reading every single market report, and you started reading everything you can just about what properties are and what they aren't. At that end of the 3 months, you're going to be much further ahead than people that just came in and started doing what they were asked to do on a daily basis and not doing anything over and above. So I would call these extracurricular, for lack of a better term, but I really do think that they're necessary. So spend the time doing that. Build your foundation on those first 3 months on committing to becoming a market expert. And the second point, and again, this is just something that you need to be cognizant of at every point of your career as a broker, is that you need to be prospecting for new business. So, point number one, become an expert in the business. Point number two, prospect for new business. There's that great movie, Glengarry Glen Ross. If you haven't watched it, that is a real estate cult classic. I think you should also watch that. That should be step number 3. Watch Glengarry Glen Ross. But there's a line in there that Alec Baldwin used, is always be closing. And I think that that's kind of like an old school sales term. I would change it to always be prospecting. Always be prospecting for new business. And it's hard to do this in your first 3 months. So perhaps somewhere down the road, I could do a follow-up video on this call, on a live stream, and just talk about a system to develop more long-term business. But in the first 3 months, I would just be trying to meet everybody I possibly could, whether that's a property owner, whether that's a tenant, whether that's a lawyer or an accountant or a banker or somebody that works in this business. I would say with no degree of understatement that my success is directly tied to the amount of relationships I built over my 16-year career. That is it. Like I attribute a huge amount of attribute to that alone. So I can't understate that enough either, is start committing to just building out these relationships, and you'll want to have some type of system to track it. I recommend getting some kind of CRM as early into your career as possible, so you can start tracking who you're prospecting. And again, it can be direct, such as a property owner or a tenant, or it can be ancillary, where it could be a referral partner like a lawyer or an accountant, banker, architect, interior designer, anybody working in niche areas such as like a crane company. All these types of potential referral partners can be a great source of business. It's a long-term horizon. You probably won't start getting business from them immediately, but if you're committed to this being a career, and I go back to that again, if you're committed to it being a career, this isn't one that you can just come out of the gates and start making money day one, and you have your business on autopilot. It's one that takes a lot of inertia to get off the ground. And it's very cheesy, but I've used the analogy of like a rocket ship. If a rocket ship is taking off, it requires so much energy and fuel and power to get off the ground. But once you actually hit cruising altitude, and you're in the atmosphere, it's easier to move. But getting off that ground takes a tremendous amount of energy and focus. So be prepared to buckle down. It's commit to those two things right off the bat. Become an expert in your market, and always be prospecting. And third, watch Glenn Ross. I'd be happy to expand on this a little bit more. I wanted to keep this about 20 minutes just in case there are no questions. It's still a relatively digestible video. But if you do have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them right now. Damien, and thanks so much for joining in here too, Damien. I'm wanting to step onto the commercial stage, transitioning from residential, and have a buyer that is ready to buy some industrial space. How do I source some prospects for him? Great question. And Damien, I don't know if you heard my story before, but I actually started in residential as well. So I joined a residential brokerage in 2004, and I did it for a year. Quickly discovered that it wasn't for me. I didn't see a long term plan on that, so I transitioned to industrial in 2005. So very similar story to yours. I would say that you've got to shift your mindset right off the bat. And I can speak to this anecdotally because I went through this exact same process, where on for residential real estate, you've got access to the majority of available listings just through your MLS system. Or perhaps is going on like some of the other ones like Zillow or other ways that you can find residential property. I probably sound very out of touch on that because I really don't know how it works right now. But when I did that 16, 17 years ago, we could go onto our MLS platform and find 95% of the listings. And then there might have been a few for sale by owner companies where you could go and find the rest of them. In commercial real estate, there is no central database that covers all of the listings. So there's a few out there like loopnet.com and crexy.com. They do a really good job of trying to advance the industry by having properties listed in a central place. But there's and just as a guess for my own market, I would say there's 40 to 50% of all available listings on those sites. So if you're only finding 40 to 50% of all available product, you're not doing your client a good service if you're only showing them half of the available listings. So what I would encourage you to do, and it goes back to that foundation of starting to drive industrial areas. If you committed to, and maybe you need to spend more time in those first couple of weeks that you're doing it, but if you were to spend 5 hours on a Saturday and 5 hours on a Sunday and just drive every single road of every industrial park and start taking note of properties that are just listed for sale, and then go back and follow up with those brokerages. There's going to be a lot of brokerages that don't put their properties on those listing platforms. There's going to be a lot of general sellers. Could be a developer that goes out and develops their own properties and sells them privately. Could just be somebody that has a property that they've owned for a while and they don't know how to sell it, so they put it up for sale by themselves. I really think the foundation for how you're going to uncover every rock starts with doing the drive. And that's not the end all by any means, because there's going to be things that get missed by doing that. But I would start by driving through all the industrial parks. Then the next part, and this is a tedious process as well, but this is the process that I still go through to this day, is I'll start going through every brokerage's website. So make a list of all the brokerages in your market, and there's going to be all the big ones like the Colliers, JLL, Cushman, Avison, NAI. You'll see those big ones in every market, but there's also going to be a lot of regional or boutique brokerages that might work just in your area. And I know you're in Las Vegas, so there'll be a lot of brokerages there, and then there'll also be developers that develop product and then go and sell it as well. So you just start making a list, put it in an Excel spreadsheet or bookmark it in your browser, but start making a list of all these different companies that are transacting properties, and go through every single one of them just to see if you catch anything that you didn't see on one of those major platforms, or you didn't see when you're driving. And that exercise could take you a few hours to do, but you'll uncover more things when you do that. And once you get to another level, and again, this goes back to the foundation I had of building as many relationships as you can. Once you start meeting and getting to know other brokers, then it's a pretty quick phone call to them and just say, this is what I'm looking for. I've got someone in the market for this. Do you have anything coming down the pipe, or do you know anything off market that could work for these guys? And if you're willing to spend that extra time, I think you could appreciate, Damien, that if you spend that extra time, and there is a broker that you know, and he has a property coming up that hasn't hit the market, it might only be him and a few other people that know about it, and you could find a property before it hits the market. You're at that point now, you're doing a great service for your client, and they'll be very appreciative. But that takes work. There's the average person can't just go into Las Vegas's market and start calling brokers and asking them to send them stuff that's not on the market yet. That's just very unlikely from my experience. But you can do that once you've established yourself as active in the market, and you've worked on building those relationships. And building relationships with brokers is imperative in my mind as well. And I've always thought it's an interesting business where we compete against each other to get the business. I might be competing against a few other brokers to get a listing or a tenant mandate, and it's a competitive process. But once I have it or someone else has it, then we need to cooperate with each other. And I can't think of another business that's unique like that, where we compete against each other and then we cooperate with each other. But those relationships with other brokers will also serve you very well. And then the next part, and again, it piggybacks on that thought about just building relationships, is once you have a list of property owners, and put them into your CRM so you know what they own, you've got a detailed record on them, then you can start periodically following up with them. And it's great if you have a buyer in tow, because you could call them up and say, hey, I've got a buyer that's actively looking for the type of property that you have you given any thought to selling that down the road? And that might be a foot in the door. They might tell you no, but you could always ask them if it's something that you could follow up with them down the road to see if they might change their mind. And if you cultivate a big enough of a list where you could regularly contact these people that are potential sellers down the road, you're going to be in that much better of a position to again find things that might not make their way to LoopNet or Crexy. So it really is it, it's and that, going back to that earlier point that I had about, you just have to change your mind shift on this. I can't think of many residential agents that would go through those motions to find a house for sale, about trying to call other agents and ask them if they have something coming up, developing a list of all the property owners who might want to sell down the road, driving every street in a neighborhood just to see if something's coming up. I think a lot of residential agents, maybe I shouldn't speak for them all, and maybe they'd be right to correct me on this. But I think a lot of residential agents would probably revert back to just searching properties online, seeing what's on the MLS, and sending out a search that way. But commercial real estate is, for better or for worse, it's just the way that it is. And the carrot, and Damien, you and I talked about this last week as well. The carrot is that there's some really big fees that can be made. So if you're willing to put in that legwork and that elbow grease and go the extra mile to find everything you possibly can, that metaphorical turn over every rock that you can, I think you'll be in that much better of a position than somebody that just relies on going on LoopNet, as an example. So hope that answers the question on that. Uh, Follow-up question. I want to go knock on some doors to get some listings. Any suggestions on what to say? Great question as well. And I'm a big believer that getting listings is a great tool in this business. You'll start building relationships with the clients. A lot of the times, these guys own more than one building, or if they own a building and they've got a few different bays in there, you might turn over leases in there multiple times. Just before I answer your question, just a quick story on that. I have a client who owns a multi-tenant industrial property in my market, and there are a lot of small bays, so it's a lot of work for small deals. But I've done over 40 deals with that client alone over the last 10 years or so. So there's a real opportunity. Whereas in residential, where your background is, to sell 40 houses to one client is like probably inconceivable. But that is possible in commercial. So I'm a big believer in chasing listings. So in terms of what I would say, uh, you'll uncover two scenarios. You either go in and it'll be a tenant that's in the building, or you might go in and you might see that it is an owner operator, an owner user that owns the building, and they also operate their business out of that. So that'd be the easiest one. If you're going in and you find out that they own the building, and you could uncover that just quite simply. Hey, I'm working actively in this area. I'm really committed to being an expert here and learning everything I can about transactions that are happening and things that are moving, and 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 I'm happy to share that data with you as well if that's something you're interested in. I was just curious if you own this property or if you're a tenant here. And that might be the foot in the door technique. You're ultimately going to want to find something that you're comfortable asking. But I'm a big believer that having something of value when you're going in and talking to these companies is a lot better than just going in cold and saying, "Hey, would you guys want to sell your property?" That's tough. Like that's a really tough ask for brokers to do. But if you go in with something of value, and it could be something as simple as a sales comp. If you were to find out a property down the street just sold a couple weeks ago and you had some data on it, I think that's a pretty good opening, is to say, "Hey, I just thought I'd share with you a sales comp that happened down the street. This property sold for $150 a square foot. The buyer was an out of state buyer, and this is what some of the feedback that he had on it." And if you're a property owner, that's really good market intelligence. Like, I can't imagine any property owner not wanting to hear that stat. And for me, and I own some property. If someone came in and offered me that, I definitely want to hear about that comp. So I think uh, owners are going to be much more receptive if you go in with something, just some sort of information, some sort of data, and use that as a conversation starter. Maybe it gets you somewhere, maybe it doesn't, but at the very least, you've shared something with them, and they'll remember you a lot more than they remember the guy that just came in and asked for their business. So that'd be the main thing I'd say, is go in with some type of value. Another one that I've recommend quite a bit as well is having a brochure. So whether you're prospecting for new tenants or prospecting to get listings, if you go in with a brochure of a property list, ideally something that you have, if you go in and the message is pretty simple. Hey, I've got a property for lease or for sale just down the street. Just thought I'd share this information with you to see if you guys had any interest in buying or leasing at this point. And again, you're bringing in real market data. If it's a tenant that's in there, why wouldn't they want to know about a market comp for a huge expense item on their P&L? Like, their rent probably accounts for 10-15% of their P&L statement. Why wouldn't they want to know some real-time market data on what's happening in relation to what their lease is? So again, that goes back. You're providing them something of value and hoping that that can lead to you having a conversation with them. And maybe they have a need right now. Maybe there's, like, we're in here for another 3 years. So we don't have any need right now. And you just say, "Hey, I really am focused on this particular area. I want to be an expert in here." You don't need to say that you already are an expert. I think people appreciate honesty as opposed to like that fake sales guy. But if you go in and you could even say, "Hey, I'm brand new to this market, but I'm committed to learning everything that I can about it. And if you don't have a lease coming up for the next 3 years, that's fine. This is a long term game for me, and I'd love to help you in 3 years. And in 3 years, think how much I'll know in comparison to what I know right now. Do you mind if I just keep in touch with you? So I might be able to help you in 3 years. And I can't imagine many people being rude about that, and they might just say, "Yeah, that's fine. Follow up with me." Uh, but most people probably won't follow up. So take that information, go back, put it in your CRM, and once a year or once every 6 months, whatever interval you feel is necessary, just follow up with them. And don't follow up to see if they've changed their plans. Follow up with something of value. Hey, there's a space that just leased. Just wanted to give you some market comps. I know you said you're not going to move for a while, but I just wanted to share this with you. If you do that enough times, and when they do have a need arise, you will be the guy. So it comes back to starting that conversation. And I know that's probably a roundabout way to get to an answer on that, Damien. But I think what the key thing is that go whoever you're talking to, whether you're prospecting for new listings, for sale or for lease, or whether you're prospecting to get a tenant mandate, it's the same message that I would encourage you to have right at the beginning, and that is to go into them with having some value. What can I offer you first, with no expectation that you're going to give anything to me on it. I'm not asking for any money on this. I'm just providing you some useful market information that I hope you could utilize. And and the reason that I'm doing this is I really want to be an expert in this market, and getting to talk to businesses or property owners like yourself is really important to me. I really want to build my career the right way by establishing myself as an expert, and building that trust. And I'm doing it by giving value first, with the only hope that is, if you do have a need for a broker at some point down the road, I just love to have the opportunity to be included in that list. And that's it. Like there's no pressure on that. You're not saying you should list this with me right now because the market's hot, and if you don't, you're missing out. That to me is just a sleazy tactic. I think the more genuine approach is offer something of value. Just express that you whether you are an expert or whether you're just committed to being an expert. Obviously, be clear on that. But same idea. I'm committed to being an expert in this market, and I just want to keep in touch of everything that's happening, whether it's the tenants in the market or people leasing or selling properties. I just want to be aware of every opportunity. And if the need ever came up for you to need a broker, I don't expect your business. I would just love to have the opportunity to give you a proposal and show you what I can do. And I think if you were to look at it from either the seller's position or a property owner's position or a tenant's position, that to me is a lot more of an authentic approach. And I myself would much rather work with somebody that took that approach, as opposed to somebody that's just cold calling me and asking me if I want to list my property. So that was probably a long answer on that, Damien. But that's really all goes back to those two things: get to be an expert in the market, or at least make a mental commitment that you're going to be an expert in the market, and go out and do it, and then just build as many relationships as you can. I'll get that question in a second. I just have a drink of water. That was a longer longer answer than I expected. You sort of just answered this, but being new, how can you sell myself and compete with seasoned agents? This is a fantastic question, and I've kind of got a an answer in mind for you on this. And again, anything that I say is just how I would approach it. You're still going to need to develop your own style on it. But if I was talking to a prospective tenant or a prospective owner, I would say something to the effect, if I was new in the business, that Jerry, I just wanted to provide you some market information on this. That same conversation I would have had a little bit earlier. After we get into that, and question that might come up is, well, how long have you been in business? Or you might even volunteer to offer this, especially if you are brand new in the business. I would say something to the effect that, listen, I'm new to this business. You could even say that you're new to the city. Be very, very clear with it, but uses it as an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage. And I think that this is where there's an element of sales that's overlooked. I think a lot of people think of sales as just trying to get to close people. I think sales is most effective when you can actually be completely upfront with somebody, but use it as as a tool for you. So this is what I would say. Listen, I'm brand new into this market, and I know that probably doesn't give you a lot of comfort, going with somebody brand new. But here's where I think I can separate myself from the more seasoned brokers. And you might have seen this. You might have seen that it's hard getting a hold of some guys on a Friday afternoon, or in the summer they might not even be in the city. You might have seen this, and I can tell you that that I've noticed it as well. Whereas because I'm new, I'm unwaveringly committed to working as hard as I can, and I'm going to outwork everybody. If somebody wants to see the property at 3 at night on a Sunday, because it's the only time they can see it, I'll wake up and I'll show it to them at 3 o'clock on a Sunday night. If somebody calls me Friday at 6 o'clock, I will answer that phone. And I will commit to you that I will outwork every single person in this market because I have something to prove. And and I think that that's a compelling message. I think that if I was a property owner, or if I was a tenant and somebody came to me and said, "Listen, I'm brand new, but I'm going to outwork everybody." And of course, you actually do need to outwork everybody. You can't just make an empty platitude. But if that was the message, that I'm going to outwork everybody in the market because I have something to prove here, I want to be an expert in this. This is a long-term career for me, and it starts by committing to my first clients that I will do everything I can within my power to perform for you. And if you're trying to take on a listing, you could say, I will take a copy of the brochure of your property and I'll physically drop it off with every single company in the market. I will personally drop off a brochure to everybody. And I can assure you that there's not a lot of seasoned brokers that are going to be doing that. They're going to rely more on their expertise, and justifiably so. They're going to feel that they're in a position where they don't have to do that anymore. But for a junior guy, I think you can just outwork everybody, and that is a legitimate value add service that you would be giving clients, is the luxury of outworking people who might not even get out of bed for something like that. So that'd be my uh, mantra, I guess, for lack of a better term. My mantra would be upfront, disclose upfront. I'm new, but I'm hungry. I'm hungry, and I've got legs where I'm going to run, and I will. You tell me where you want me to run. Tell me how fast you want me to run, and that's my job. My job is to make sure you're happy on this, and that'd just be my message on it. Hope that helps. Damien, if just a follow up to that as well, if you ever do want to just kind of brainstorm some ideas on what to say, I'm always happy to do it. In fact, I love talking about this stuff, as you could probably tell. Chame, hope I'm saying your name right there. Thanks for the question. Thanks for joining in. How can I convince sellers to agree to seller financing, which will help us get much better cash on cash returns for expensive, low cap rate deals? Good question. So wearing my investor hat, the first industrial property that I ever bought, we did with seller financing. So it's very, very similar a story on what you're doing, and that was one where we needed to do it for a few reasons. First, we didn't want to go through the motions of actually getting bank financing on it. Wasn't a big property, and we had no experience. It was a partner of mine and I that bought it 50-50. So we talked to the seller, and the first thing that I would say is you need to get a good understanding on whether they even can do seller financing. A lot of times, sellers might just not have any room to do it. They might have a mortgage that's already creeping up on their equity. They might be needing that equity for other things, so they just want to do a cash sale. There's going to be a large percentage of the sellers that you talk to that just aren't able or aren't interested. And for those ones, trying to convince them to do it, particularly if they can't, well, then just the non-starter. But even if they don't want to, trying to convince them is a tough task. But for the sellers out there who might own the property free title, or they've got a small amount of debt, then the message that we had to the seller that we bought ours off was pretty simple. We'll pay you 100. I think we paid them 150 basis points above what the going rate was. So if memory serves, this goes back to 2014. I think we offered them 5%, and I think at the time you could have got like a 3.5 or 3.75 mortgage. So we offered them a little bit of a spread on what bank financing would give us. We did a 3-year term with I think it was just a 20-year amortization, but a 3-year term. And then we left it that we could pay it off at any given time with no penalty, which we actually ended up doing. We bought out that mortgage the following year. But you've got to look at it from the standpoint that why would the seller want to give you seller financing? For them, every seller is just going to prefer to get cash. That's how every seller is approaching it when they decide that they want to sell their property. Is they're not even contemplating that at that time, unless for whatever reason that seed's been planted in their mind. Most sellers are just thinking, yeah, I'm going to sell it for cash. It's not even on their radar that they'd consider doing seller financing. So you've got to approach it from the standpoint that how can you make it attractive for them so that it's actually a win for them as opposed to just a win for you. So put it in their perspective. How can you get them to see that this is actually a very viable opportunity? And for you, you need to do it so, like you're saying, better cash on cash returns. If you're buying at a low cap or it's an expensive property, that's you. But from the seller's standpoint, he's going to say, well, that's a you problem, not a me problem. So instead of even framing it in a way that you need to look at it so that it solves your problem, look at it on how it can help him. And if you approach it with that mindset as opposed to one where it's just you need this, then you could say, well, like, how could we structure this so that we can make this uh, a success story for you? And there could be different ways to do it. Perhaps there's tax implications. I'm not an accountant, so I don't want to give any accounting advice here, especially as every market has different rules on that. But you might be able to say, what happens if we explore this from we could delay the closing on this so that when the money is actually paid out, it comes into a different calendar year or comes out at a different time. I wouldn't give any tax advice when you're saying this. I would just say there might be a way that we can defer when this actually closes, so that you can defer any tax obligations you have to another year. If that's something you're interested in, I'd say let's just talk to both of our accountants and we'll see. But now you're starting to think creatively where the seller might say, you know what, that is right. I might actually have like a big tax bill selling this right now. So if we could defer that for 2 years, and maybe it's not even a seller financing, maybe you have an option to purchase it so that you're making payments on it. Similar idea. I think it could be structured very similar to a vendor take back mortgage. But I wouldn't commit to anything beyond. If this is something that you'd explore, if you have the capacity to do this, why don't we talk with our accountants and see if it is a way that you could avoid these tax uh, big tax loss right now and defer that down the road. And then that's something that could work for both of us. And that's like that's how I would really be approaching it is how can you help them? And another way is you might just offer them 50, 100 basis points higher than what they would get themselves. So you could say, if you sell this right now, if you're not going to do a 1031, or if you're not going to redeploy this into something, you don't know what you're going to do with those funds, why don't you just lend it back to me in that form of a vendor take back or seller financing? Lend it back to me and I'll pay you 100 basis points over what the going rate is right now. And then you know that you're getting a really solid return on a property that you know very well. So worst case scenario, if I can't pay it, then you'll, after you go through all the motions and the channels to do it, then you get back a property that you already know about. And if you're putting down enough of a down payment and they're comfortable with who you are, they might say, well, yeah, absolutely, I can actually make a good return. Maybe I can make 5% on this money. Whereas if I put it into a low yield bond, I may make 2 or 3% versus making 5% on a property that he already owns. So I would just, I would say, change how you're looking at it on why you need to do it. I mean, I get it. And I was in your shoes. It was the exact same reason why I needed to do it. But the sellers don't care about what your reasons are. You just need to make it that message about how it helps them. So I hope that answers your question. Jordan, thanks for joining in. Great content. Really do appreciate that. Aside from CCIM and SIOR organized event opportunities, where can I go to receive the best information about my local market? So fantastic question. The one that I always recommend is NAIOP. So it used to be an acronym that stood for the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties, and they got away from that name, but they kept the acronym, so it's still NAIOP. But their heavy focus is industrial real estate, but they also bill themselves as a commercial real estate association, and I think they've got 50 chapters across North America. So there's probably a chapter if you're in a big city, there's probably a chapter in your market, or at least there's one close by you because there's a lot in North America. I would heavily look into NAIOP. I've been a member there for years, and I think that they produce some incredible content. I registered for an event 2 weeks from now that they're putting on. I've attended a number of their webinars that they've put on in a North American context. They are a fantastic organization, and if you join as a single member, I think it's $700 or so, and not only will you get access to fantastic information, but the networking is incredible because you're going to be meeting developers, property owners, all the affiliated members, lawyers, bankers, accountants, all those people that I mentioned earlier about building relationships with. That is a fantastic organization. I can actually say enough good things about NAIOP. That'd be the very first one that I check out. Another one that's closely related is BOMA, and BOMA's been around for a long time, Building Owners and Managers Association, and same thing, they've got chapters all over the place. They're, in my opinion, they're more geared to the property management side and the operation side. I've been to a number of events. I personally haven't got as much value from BOMA as I have from NAIOP, and currently I'm not a member of BOMA, but I don't get a kickback from NAIOP for endorsing them. So you could tell just how much I sing their praises because I think it's a fantastic organization. So NAIOP would be the first one. CCAM and SIOR both put out a ton of great information as well. Their membership driven organizations focus predominantly on brokerage. So if your interest is brokerage, I always recommend that CCAM 101 course. Whether you're a broker or just an investor or someone looking to learn more about the industry, that is an excellent course. If you're not a broker, I don't know if there's as much value joining SIOR or CCAM, or whether you even can. I think they have affiliated memberships, but I think that you can get a lot of that information without having to join and pay those dues. But if you are a broker, I'm a member and have designations of both, and I'm a big fan of both as well. So I would say NAIOP is your best choice. And then going back to just one thing that I mentioned earlier on is just start reading all the brokerage market reports. So if you search in your market, let's say you're in Chicago, just search Chicago commercial real estate market reports. And you might even want to put in Q4 or Q3 just so you can see the companies that are doing it regularly. 2021 Q4 is an example market report, and you'll start getting a list of all the different brokerages that regularly put out reports. And for the most part, these are free. You might have to sign up to get their reports, but they don't charge you. It's just they'll have your email address. And those market reports are great. They typically will do a full market commentary on what's happened in the past quarter. They'll talk about those new developments going on, key rates that you can start getting into. You'll uncover a ton of information if you read 4 to 5 market reports a quarter. So that's an easy one to do as well, and it's free. And then actually one more that I'm a huge fan of as well is Globe Street. So it's globest.com. You have to register with an email, but it's free. You don't pay anything for it. You just have to set up an account with an email, and they break down market reports into sectors. So I get an industrial one every couple of days with all the key news that's happening in there, and that's usually one of the first things that I do in the day is I'll read one of these reports, and it might be in a market that doesn't necessarily relate to me, but I still find it really interesting. So globest.com. just real quick, just to even show you how current this is. Yesterday, November 17th, I got sent their email, and what I found really interesting is that there's a 650 million square feet worth of industrial real estate under development in the U.S., but a quarter of that is concentrated in six markets, and those Phoenix, Atlanta, Dallas. Um, I can't remember the other three. Uh, yeah, I don't even want to do it justice. But five of them were inland markets. I think the other one was Inland Empire. I think that was the one of one of the coastal cities. But the other five were inland markets, and I would have thought a lot of the new development would have been on those coastal cities right now. So I was surprised, and I actually came away with something that was quite interesting. And if someone wanted to, they could take that information and dig a little bit deeper, go onto these brokerage websites, and really try to uncover more information. But yeah, again, probably another long-winded answer. I'm guessing Wyatt's probably wondering why I keep talking on this, but NAIOP for sure. Uh, uh, Maybe BOMA, you might want to look into it. But NAIOP for sure. Brokerage websites and globestreet.com. I do it regularly myself, so you'll gain so much knowledge just by going through those three channels. Um, Thanks for the question on that too. That was really good. Okay, well, I'll wrap up with that. We're just about an hour. I appreciate everybody who tuned in, and thank you so much for the questions on that. It really do appreciate the going back and forth. So it's not just me talking all the time. It really does mean a lot that you guys have tuned in, and really do appreciate the questions. If I can ever help with anything, shoot me an email. I know a few people on here I've talked to offline, and I genuinely try to respond to every message that I get, because I'm a big advocate that my success comes in large part from the people that have helped me along the way. So if I can return that favor and help anyone else along the way, I am more than happy to. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email, Griffiths, CRE at gmail.com. Maybe we'll see if we could put that in later, maybe in the comments or something if you didn't catch that. But my last name, CRE at gmail.com. Let me know if I can ever be of help. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. Wishing you guys all a great day. Thanks.